The winds of change are blowing outside. I don't know what it's like where you are, but my hat blew off as I got out of my car. The winds of change are blowing through the corridors of Westminster. Even Quentin Letts, the ultra-conservative commentator on the Daily Mail, said this week that if the Tories don't get rid of their leader, he'll be voting for Jeremy Corbyn. I find that almost impossible to believe, having known him for 30 years, but it's a sign of the times. Brexit is blowing a gale. What kind of Brexit? Will we Brexit or not? It's all now up for grabs. Tony Blair was back on the field this week. He's got a plan. His plan is that MPs should vote down any Brexit deal and then vote for a second referendum with Remain on the ballot paper. Explosive stuff. But the winds of change in the Persian Gulf are perhaps the most dangerous Mistral of them all. And talk of Mistral leads me to the mystery of what happened to Jamal Khashoggi in his country's consulate in Istanbul in the week. Although it's no longer that much of a mystery. United States law enforcement said this evening that they have now seen and heard the audio and video of the murder most foul in Istanbul. This was a premeditated affair, according to the Turkish authorities, and the United States authorities appear to agree, because 15 people were flown in to Istanbul who promptly flew out again on the evening of the alleged murder. So they were in the country for less than 24 hours. And the identities of the 15 have been released by Turkish security. The Saudis claim that they were 15 tourists, and they flew in and left less than 24 hours later because they'd seen all there is to see in the great city of Istanbul. It's a bit like those two Russian tourists that went to Salisbury to see the world's largest clock, or was it spire? The Turks and the Americans are in no doubt, especially when you see the identity of the 15 that flew in and out so quickly. They included a forensics expert whose professional speciality is field postmortems. He carries out the fastest decimation of bodies of anyone in Saudi Arabia, usually when they're already dead, I presume. In this case, who knows who did the deed? Who knows what actually happened? But we do know that what happened was clearly intended to happen. Frank Gardner, never knowingly underinformed from British security sources, says that he thinks that Khashoggi had a heart attack whilst inside the building. Well, if he did have a heart attack, you'd have to ask what brought it on and why it required him to be chopped up into pieces and carried out of the consulate in cake boxes, because that's what the authorities say happened. And I stress, the Turkish authorities are not the only authorities in this case. Jamal Khashoggi was a permanent resident of the United States of America. And even worse for the Saudi royal family, he was a star columnist on the Washington Post, arguably the world's most famous newspaper. And of course, a bastion of liberalism. And liberalism is already on the offensive against Donald Trump across a pretty broad front. And Saudi Arabia has just been added to that front. Turkey itself now has a real difficulty. It rivals Saudi Arabia for the allegiance of Sunni Muslims in the world, a very, very significant section of the world's population, well over 1 billion Sunni Muslims in the world, spread, of course, from Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, all the way to the Persian Gulf and South Asia too. And Turkey is probably winning the allegiance of more than the Saudi royal family at this point in time. Saudi Arabia is effectively ruled by a 33-year-old man, Prince Mohammed bin Sultan, the rock star prince. You might remember him. Well, that's at least what he was called by the same British media just months ago that is now calling for, metaphorically speaking, his head. And how can they do otherwise? Prince MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is the effective ruler of the country. Therefore, he is in pole position in the various foreign policy disasters in which the Saudi government is involved. The war in Yemen, which according to the United Nations has left 80% of the population of Yemen on the brink of starvation by the end of this year, where there is a cholera epidemic, where there are tens, maybe scores of thousands of dead people as a result of Saudi bombardment, missiles and aircraft. It's no secret that most of those bombs and missiles are sold to Saudi Arabia by the United States and Britain. You see where I'm going here. If MBS, if the Saudi government has suddenly moved on the death of a single journalist into a position of being persona non grata, how will it be possible for business as usual to continue? You just heard on the news that business people are voting with their feet. Richard Branson, for one, has pulled out of an important trade fair in Riyadh this weekend, and many others are doing so. The Museum of Natural History came under inordinate pressure in London yesterday because the Saudis had booked a hall in their premises to celebrate Saudi National Day. Not much to celebrate, if I'm any judge, in the corridors of power in Riyadh, because everything just changed. Erdogan cannot possibly accept this blood insult to his country on his soil. He had already taken the side of Qatar in the convoluted comic opera standoff between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Be sure he will now redouble that support. He may even get involved in regime change efforts inside Saudi Arabia itself. It will be difficult for Trump to maintain his business as usual stance, although it will be tricky for him to disengage from it, because by all accounts, Donald Trump's family have, shall I say it this way, close relations with MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And of course, the Democrats, the Clintons, both of them, had very close relations with the Saudi regime too. But that will not stop liberal America now going on the offensive for one of their own. We'll be talking to the most distinguished Arab journalist, Abdel Bari Atwan, editor-in-chief of the London-based news site Rai Al Yom, and the founder and editor-in-chief of, once upon a time, the most famous newspaper in the Arab world, Al-Quds Al-Arabi. And he, I've no doubt, will give his point of view. I just want to add this and nothing more. This is not God against the devil. The Turkish regime has killed many a journalist, from Serena Shrim, the journalist who uncovered the relations between the Turkish government and the early parts of the insurgency in Syria, and who was mysteriously killed in a road accident shortly after her broadcasts to that effect. Erdogan has imprisoned scores, maybe hundreds of journalists, especially following the attempted coup against him just a year or so ago. Neither is it the case that other countries don't murder journalists. Many of them have, many of them do. But there's journalists and there's journalists, and I just have the feeling that this will be the straw that broke the camel's back in regard to relations between the West and Saudi Arabia. None of this that I've been saying is speculation. The Saudis are not really even trying to dispute the now prevailing narrative. It is remarkable, given the amount of money they've spent on media and on public relations, that they've not been able to muster any counter story, because they seem not to have known that the Turkish bugged the Saudi consulate and every consulate. In fact, every embassy and every consulate in the world is probably bugged by the host country. They don't seem to know what an Apple Watch is, but Khashoggi was wearing one, and thus recorded at least the early stages of his demise. I suppose the watch stopped ticking when the bone saw started buzzing. It's a gruesome, grotesque story. But as I wrote on day one, the day after it happened, you can still see what I wrote. I'm still proud of what I wrote. This was a murder, which was not just a crime, but was a very considerable blunder. All that, plus fracking, plus climate change, and who knows what else will blow into the studio on this blustery night.